So Roy Ayers, Everybody Loves the Sunshine. I love this sound. And I love it because it's like got its own space and it's very nuanced. The sound itself, in terms of the components that make up the actual patch, and also the way it's performed, and also the way it sits in the music. So in 3 places, there's something special going on. And I say nuanced because there's little subtle things going on that you wouldn't necessarily do automatically, when you're just playing a synth sound on a keyboard. And I'm going to take you through each one of those things, starting with the sound. So I'm using the ARP 2600. I read that it could have been done on an ARP Odyssey. I could probably make this sound on a Mini Moog too. I chose the 2600 because it gives me a little bit extra edge. I get the 3rd oscillator over the ARP Odyssey. And I'm using that in a very specific and subtle way. So 3 oscillators on the ARP 2600, 1, 2, 3. The first oscillator is a sawtooth. The second oscillator is a pulse wave, and I'm going to patch that in so you can see it because it's normaled on the 2600. And then the 3rd oscillator, you can see the input to the filter is a sawtooth wave. So I'm going to take that sawtooth from oscillator 3 into the filter. So already, quick review. Sawtooth from oscillator 1, pulse wave from oscillator 2, and sawtooth wave from oscillator 3. And the pulse wave from oscillator 2, you'll see the pulse width is very skinny. It's at 10%. So now what's going on with the pitches of these oscillators? I'll isolate them. First oscillator I'm calling the main oscillator is the sawtooth from oscillator 3. So let's just hear it. That's our main pitch. Now, what makes the sound kind of interesting is this oscillator, oscillator 2, which is the pulse wave, is tuned to a 4th below that pitch. So you get, and when you put them together, you get, so we're hearing the sound in 4ths. So the top note is the main note. So what I do, this is the first nuance. In terms of the mix, I drop that 4th down in terms of volume. So you see I have the filter section, there's a mixer in the filter. So I'm mixing the 4th a little bit lower than the main pitch. So you can hear the difference. Let's hear it at full volume. Now the 4th a little bit less. Full. Less. Without. So it makes the difference. So if you were voicing for orchestra, same thing applies. You would maybe have the lead have an extra couple of violins on it so that it's a little bit louder and it stands out. Or in a big band, you might put an extra, like double the saxophones, or you have 2 trumpets, you put them together instead of the solo trumpet. Or also just indicate in the dynamics to play a little bit softer when you're not playing the melody. So this, and it's also like on a piano, like playing Chopin, you might bring out the melody a little bit louder than the left hand or the chords. So that's our first subtle thing. Quick interruption. Please remember to like and subscribe to the channel. You really all mean a lot to us. We appreciate where we are today, and it's all because of you. So click those buttons and leave your comments. We read them. They're so thoughtful, and they give us good ideas for making videos in the future. And I also want to point the attention to Think Like a Synth, this course, because I haven't really talked about this part of it so much, but I really geared it towards a non-technical point of view. And one of the things that I had to figure out from an early time when I was doing sessions was to avoid knob confusion. And I'm calling it that because like when you're just turning the knob and trying to get a sound, and then you don't really know what it's going to do, and you're just kind of listening, and then it doesn't do exactly what you want, and you kind of find your way. I couldn't afford that, so I came up with a method. I had some great teachers, and I sort of put it all together, and it's the same method that I use right now that I've been using for 40 years on hit records and films, and it helped me be able to make the sound before I heard it. So, because I didn't always have the opportunity, there were other musicians in the room and things were going on. So, I didn't even always have the ability to put headphones on. So I could make the sound, get it close on the panel, at least 80%. And I know you can do it. And then I can dial up the sound once I pull it in. I'm on the big speakers, and then, we can do something fun with the track. So the course is designed for that. Check it out. Let me know what you think. We're offering sales from time to time, so keep an eye on it. It's at anthonymarinellimusic.com. Think like a synth. The things that I'm showing you in these breakdowns, you'll be able to learn those concepts in way more depth in the course. So let's go. And then the second subtle thing in terms of the sound is I've added a high octave, and you'll hear it come in. Here's without it. You hear that? So without it, with it. So I bring it down below the fourth, but I want you to hear something else that's special about it. You hear that beating? Listen to it. So that's without the beating. Put the beating back. It adds a little bit of dissonance. And what I do, since it's a high octave, I go sharp with it. What I like to do when I'm detuning, and this is a really important thing, when you're detuning synthesizers, if you take the high oscillator and go a little bit sharp, and then if you have a lower octave or another oscillator and go a little bit flat, that's called a Wyoming tuning, like on a piano, and it'll keep your center frequency. So you can add a little bit of dissonance and detuning, which I don't normally do because I've said this many times. Synths go out of tune on their own, so I like to tune them and let it just kind of find its way. But this is a special case where I'm adding this high octave oscillator, and I want to get a little bit of dissonance, but now I'm going to bring the level down. Without it, very subtle. And now let's get that beating back. You hear it? So you get something that's like a little bit cool, like it's just a little bit dissonant, almost like a jazz element to it, or something that's just a little bit like not too perfect. And I like it. It gives it expression. Okay, so notice the resonance is pretty high up, just short of oscillating. Right, that's oscillating. Okay, and then when I release, woo, too much resonance. So you see how subtle that setting is. Just right. And what's controlling that tail is the release time of the sound. Not so interesting. So when it's played, I release it at a certain point in the groove. And that's another part of the sound. So it's like you've got the core sound and then you've got the fall off. So I'm very aware of the fall off. So we've got this blend of harmonics with the fourth and the high octave, a little bit detuned, and we've got the release time with a lot of resonance, so it kind of just bends. You hear that pitch bend. And that's because this envelope generator, this ADSR envelope generator, is modulating the filter, and it's making the pitch of the filter go down, right? Because when you modulate the filter, it's filter frequency, and that's pitch. So the pitch of this sine wave, the resonance, is going down. You can hear it. So it's like a secondary sound that's happening. Now I take this whole thing, when I say whole thing, I mean the filter and all the oscillators in the filter, and it's going into the VCA. Now it's already normaled, but I'm showing you the patch from the filter to the VCA, and I use another envelope generator. Let's patch that to control the VCA. And it's basically just a gate. There's no attack time, and there's a lot of release so that I can hear that fall off from the ADSR envelope generator. And then the last thing, output of the VCA is going to a reverb tank. So I'm using a spring reverb, right? But I'm going directly into it. So I'm getting a lot more reverb. And then I patch that reverb into this mixer, which is the output mixer. So I have the straight sound, and let's hear it. Straight, right? And now, if I bring this one up, I get reverb. And then you put them together. And then nuance-wise, again, a little bit less reverb. Just mostly straight with a little less reverb. There you have it. And the last, I guess we should talk about the amount of envelope generator modulation to the filter. So I want you to hear some differences because I'm really pumping the filter. If it were less, it would be like this. Good sound. So I get it to the point where it's just pushing the filter wide open without going into like a noisy, overdriven filter. So you hear it? That's getting really high. So I'm down around there. And that's something you want to play with. And you can also use EQ, you know, so if you get it to about here, you'll be able to bring out some of these highs without getting your sound too thin. So by keeping the ADSR modulation to the filter like down a little bit, because I want the sound to be bright, but I don't want to get too bright because I want to retain body to the sound. And so that's why I'm careful about finding the right spot for this amount of modulation. So if I go too bright, see how it gets thinner? Because you're emphasizing highs. And then in relation to the lows, you've got more highs. So if I go down around here, I get just enough highs, right? And the filter's pushing. And I can always bring in a little more high end with EQ if I want to, but I've got the body of the sound in a good balance to the high end. And that's what it is. So when I talk about nuance, I want you to realize the importance of nuance. It has to do with the sound itself, right? And this tail release, so that when I release the sound, you know, the key in the middle of the track, I can release it in a certain spot of the groove, right? And then the other thing that I mentioned earlier, the notes that are being played, it's a whistler. It's like once you hear it 4 times, right? And you do hear it 4 times, it stays in your, it's like an earworm. It stays in your mind. So when you're thinking of synth parts, you know, I could easily say just keep it simple, but there's more to it than that. It's listening to the groove and finding where the spot is, where there's room, and then let it breathe. And then there's room, and then let it breathe. And then you use repetition, and then at the very end, I use the portamento, you know, 2, 3, 4, and I crank it up really high, and it slides up to the C sharp, and then quickly down to the B. So that's way more portamento than on the initial sound, which is, right? Here's no portamento. Kind of flat. Another nuance, right? And then when you want to get that big slide, you crank the portamento, and it's in the middle of the part. So I'm changing the sound. That's where analog synths, you know, they're conducive to just grabbing a knob and turning them. You can do that with your plugins. You just have to think about it and just be ready with the mouse or whatever you have, or if you have controllers, you could do it that way. So I hope you like this one. It's a really important breakdown, I think, because it emphasizes the importance of subtle nuances, performance, and, you know, doing something a little bit even dissonant, right? As I was pointing out earlier. So be sure to like and subscribe. You guys mean a lot to us, and we look at your comments. We want to keep the channel going, and we really depend on your support for that. And I want to thank all of you that have been following us and showing up for the premieres. That also goes a long way. We love checking in with all of you every week, so we're usually on those premieres. So check in with us, and let's go out on some music.